No! For the love of God, no!
Dan, what's going on? What's wrong?
Oh, man, I just found out Heather Stefanson won't be doing an election interview for the podcast. We wanted to have all three major party leaders. We got Dugald, Lamont, and we got Wab Canoe, but no Heather. This is so terrible.
Oh, Dan, come on, mate. It's no big thing. You gave it your best shot. And, I mean, yeah, I hate the idea of missing an interview with Heather as well, but we'll get past this.
Nope. It's total humiliation and a shock. I met Heather at Vic's Market on Pembina Highway in August, and after a very pleasant chat, she promised me she'd do an interview, looked me right in the eye as she was sorting through the locally grown tomatoes and said she'd make it happen. I feel so betrayed.
Dan, you're taking this way too seriously. Come on, man. It's time to put this behind us and we get on with the next podcast.
Okay, I'll try to pull myself together. Sorry, fellas. I just care way too much about the podcast.
We know that you care about the podcast. It's time to think of life post-election.
Okay, life after the election. Got it. Hey, do you think Heather will talk with me after the election?
Oh, Dan. Time to get over Heather. I can assure you she's over you.
The Winnipeg Free Press proudly presents, in partnership with CJNU 93.7 FM, Niigaan and the Lone Ranger. Here are your hosts, Niigaan Sinclair and Dan the Lone Ranger Lett.
And here we are with our last podcast before Manitoba election, October 3rd. And I have to be honest, guys, I want to get something off my chest.
Well, of course, this is really not entertainment or journalism. It's more therapy. So please go right ahead.
I am sick and tired of every time I go on a work trip that you guys then come on the podcast and make fun of me, say I'm in some secret location. Like, people think that I'm off, on some beach somewhere. And
careful.
What? I maybe was, but my point is that these work trips that I go on, like, for instance, the trip that you were referring to last podcast, I was off in Victoria and Prince George talking with teachers and communities and working with people to try to make Indigenous education better. And, I had people going, oh, hey, Dan and Adam are making fun of you on the podcast, saying that you're off doing dilly-dallying around the world.
Now, hang on just a minute. If you listen to what I said,
no,
I said he was being mean.
You actually defended me.
I said he was being mean, which he was. And I never wanted to imply that you were on vacation. I wanted to imply you were working for CSIS.
Thanks a lot. Well, speaking of vacation, it is really true. Here we are in the last podcast. We saved the last podcast for Manitoba Premier Heather Stefanson. The fact is, we called, we wrote, we emailed, we even faxed, I think. And, and just the rebukes, the refusals, the fact is that Premier Stefanson has rejected coming on the Niigaan and Lone Ranger podcast.
Now, credit where credit is due. I don't think she rejected it. I think she genuinely did say to you, Dan, that she was up for it, but things conspired against all of us, perhaps.
I'd like to think there's a good reason for not doing the interview. I'm just having trouble thinking of it right now.
I wonder about, is it me? Is it you? Is it Adam?
It's probably me.
Yeah, no, I had a colleague who said to me, well, she doesn't want to come on the podcast because she's afraid. She's afraid of you. She might be afraid of Niigaan, but she's definitely afraid of you. Adults, I don't think are afraid of other adults in this context.
Also, I think, politicians, if there's anything that this Manitoba election you had to, just to survive, you had to have very thick skin. And certainly I think that there is lots of room to criticize all parties, and we've all written pieces over the past few years that have offered evidence in whatever way, and I think that we can talk about evidence. We can talk about facts. We can talk about quotes, things that have been said during the campaign.
Well, if there was a concern in the Tory war room that, for example, you and I, or maybe just me, were being too critical of the Tory campaign. Honestly, and we're going to kind of go through the Tory campaign, but honestly, there were times where I felt in my narcissistic delusions that you guys, you're running a campaign just to make me upset. Like you're provoking me with this campaign. No,
Which I think says a lot about the ways that we take things personally. And then, we had fired up as columnists, but I also think that, campaigns are about trying to spark ideas and offer. And I hope that to date we'll do a good job. I mean, the fact is that we are here in the CJNU studios late after waiting to hear the response, and we waited as late as we possibly could before the election. And here we are, the three of us. We're going to go through the Tory campaign the best that we can, trying to be as fair as we can to be able to. We've got all the stats, statistics. We even got some quotations from Premier Stefanson to try to give an accurate review of what the Tory campaign has been, and perhaps maybe talk about it a bit and talk about some of the ups and lows. And certainly the past 48 hours have been fascinating to watch the ad campaigns that the Progressive Conservatives have made, which have made national headlines.
So first, let me set the scene. Heather Stefanson, 2 years in office. I talked to someone today, interestingly, who said she finished off the previous term in government with a very powerful budget, very generous. A lot of people who've said to me it was a Duff Roblin-like Tory budget. Definitely investing in government, improving government services, and they had all these announcements up to the end of July, and then the blackout period kicked in, and then something really weird happened. And it'll be an interesting story to pursue after the election, but they went dark for most of August. The NDP essentially started the campaign in the first week of August, 28 days before the actual start of the campaign. And maybe I'm trying to put sense into what I sometimes have found to be a nonsensical campaign. But the sense of it is running behind in the polls significantly, especially in Winnipeg, worried that they haven't made enough progress in fixing healthcare, that they haven't improved public education. They've offered lots of tax cuts. It's not buying them any love. So what do? Well, Niigaan, what did they do?
They went very dark. And the past 48 hours, all the things that brought Heather Stefanson to office. So I'll go back in the time machine a little bit too myself. Heather Stefanson defeats Shelley Glover by a slim margin. Some people criticize that campaign, that leadership convention or that leadership campaign. And so good, bad, great, ugly. I would all think we'd agree that the majority of Manitoba MLAs supported Heather Stefanson, and Heather Stefanson was supposed to be refresh the party, take from what Brian Pallister was, which had become a very rancorous, and of course we all know his comments on Indigenous peoples. And then for quite a while, I think Heather Stefanson had a pretty good ride, was fairly riding high, and of course we have to realize that Heather Stefanson's a historical person, first female premier in history, and
a family with a deep political legacy in this province. Yeah.
And I think generally was well liked, even in across different other circles. And I mean, generally in the public eye anyways, generally had a pretty fresh face. Then over the time period, she went from being what at the time was fairly moderate, because in Shelley Glover, the option for the Conservative Party was to turn really hard right and to go very Pierre Poilievre, very many ways People Party kind of.
Very convoy, I believe, is the current fashionable.
Very convoy-like in the trend of the party. And then that was generally rejected by Heather Stefanson. She even, on all the issues that she seems to be against now, was generally centrist for many of them, particularly when it comes to issues of reconciliation and the economy. And even the carbon tax wasn't something that she made a centerpiece of her focus. And when she became the lead of the Federation, representing Manitoba, which they rotate, and she generally was seen as quite, at the time, perhaps fitter for the position, and certainly someone who was ready for a prominent national voice. And something happened along the way, and this election has really turned, I think, the Conservative Party of Manitoba, Heather Stefanson, into many of the things that might have removed Brian Pallister from office, involving issues around saying quite divisive things around Indigenous peoples, really focusing on issues that Manitobans don't tend to care about. I think more Manitobans are caring about the reestablishment of ERs than tax cuts. And then, of course, probably the biggest issue of all, which is crime in the city, poverty in the city, homelessness.
So, on 2 points, it will offer a contrast. Number one, this is the premier that brokered a deal to cease operations at the Prairie Green landfill. So with everybody running around with their, in a state of chaos over should we search the landfill, how do we search the landfill, the Winnipeg police had really dropped the ball, didn't let it be known that they were quite sure that there were remains in the landfill, and Heather stepped in and brokered this deal to cease operations at the landfill. And I will say the Prairie Green people were pretty good about it. They were just kind of waiting for somebody to ask them, and they were very compliant. But, I thought, and I phoned people in Premier's office, and I said, well played, well done. That is, right now, that gesture is a pretty strong gesture, and one that she had meetings with the members of the families of the missing women, and so there's that. And then I will also say in June, she marched in Pride on the Pride Day. Now she wasn't allowed to speak because of a transgression the year before, where she spoke but didn't march. So this year they told her she was banned, but she talked her way back in. She met with people, which is what good leaders do, right? My bad, should have marched, didn't. Let me march. So she marched in Pride. Okay, then we go forward to clearly a staged announcement that she is, now we've got the feasibility study about searching Prairie Green. She comes out and not only just sort of announces flatly that the province won't pay a penny
in the exact same time.
Yeah, but then also begins this profound, effort to distort the facts surrounding the search. Like an $84 million to $184 million range became $184 million.
Yeah,
and the dangers surrounded, working in a landfill, a search like this, which are, quite frankly, the same dangers that people who work in landfills face on a daily basis, became too serious, too potent, and it was really, I suffered from a little bit of whiplash, because I was trying, but the whiplash on that was then followed up by the whiplash with the prior to the dropping of the writ with the parental rights.
Yeah, and we talked about that in our election panel, the fact that the Tories very early on made this as almost a centerpiece, almost signaling that they were moving towards a Shelley Glover-like right hard turn in the party. And we had in our election panel this conversation on the issue of parental rights, and the fact that Manitoba electorate just hasn't responded to that issue. Of course, those of you who haven't heard much about the parental rights, because it really hasn't taken center stage since the beginning of the campaign, in provinces, particularly New Brunswick and others, Alberta and so on, there is this movement to give parents control over the ways in which young people in schools can declare their gender. And there is a movement within that proposal of recognizing parental rights. And they've put out MLA Abi Khan, who is kind of one of the more publicly known faces, former Blue Bomber, as kind of the face of this parental rights campaign, by saying that, parents have a right to decide if a kid can declare their gender or not, which is just full of stereotypes and problems involving gender and sexuality and race and age and all these different parts that are really problematic that go into it.
I'm going to read a quote from Heather, and so that we are at least responding directly to what she said, and not just our interpretation of what she said. So, and this is actually from a combination of things. But these are direct quotes from the leader of the PC party. Teachers and school staff do an incredible work educating our kids, but parents want to know what's going on in the day-to-day lives of their children. We have heard loud and clear from parents that they worry about losing touch with what matters most for their children, what they're learning, how they're feeling, and if they're struggling. We want parents to have the right to be involved in addressing bullying and other behavioral changes. And by leaving parents out of that equation, I think is wrong. I think parents need to be included. That's all we're doing. So the fact is, that's really not all they're doing. Although in what they're doing, the most frustrating thing for journalists in raising the parental rights, banner and promising to amend provincial legislation to enshrine and extend parental rights is they haven't actually said. Like there are categories.
Yeah, they avoid it like the plague.
Yeah. So, in efforts to get her to expand, when you really press Heather Stefanson, what she will do is say, well, a lot of that needs to be worked out. We need to consult and talk to parents and figure it out.
And they will not ever say to talk about this as a gender issue or as a sexuality issue. It may be talked. They'll say, well, this is not about that. This is we don't know what this is about just yet. But if you look to the other provinces, when we use the word parental rights, inevitably this is caused because of the issue around sexuality in schools.
So, and here is, I've spent, 30, 40, many years covering.
We'll erase that out or block that out, beep it out.
I don't want to say how many years, but a lot of years I've been covering politics. One of the worst things that anybody outside your campaign can say about you is that I know what you're saying. I don't believe that you believe what you're saying, but you're saying it to gain some sort of a political advantage. So not only are you saying something that's ugly, but you're saying something, you're being disingenuous, intellectually dishonest about it. That really is, to me, that is the ultimate criticism I can level against a political campaign. And what I will say about the PC campaign is, I don't actually believe that Heather Stefanson believes that this is a good idea. I think that she believes, and the people around her believe, it's their last best chance to turn aside growing momentum of support for the New Democratic Party. But I don't actually believe that they believe that, which makes what they're doing kind of worse to me.
Would you say the same thing about the landfill issue? I mean, I think we both agree that Heather Stefanson has demonstrated time and time again in the past a progressive view when it comes to inclusion of young people and even when it comes to Indigenous peoples. I mean, she famously went on interviews wearing a red dress pin, saying that she stood for the issue of murder missing Indigenous women and girls. And one of her very first speeches, in fact, she came out and said, after taking leadership, we need to focus on listening to Indigenous peoples. We need to focus on reconciliation, because Brian Pallister had neglected it so badly in the past and done great harm by saying, inaccurate and divisive things. And then would you say that is at the core of Heather Stefanson in the rejection of the landfill search, that she doesn't actually believe that, but that she's saying it to appeal to a political base?
Most definitely. And the reason why is because, let's go back and look at the situation that she was facing at the time. So the feds had not said one way or the other whether they were willing to kick in money. The city was obviously trying to backpedal as quickly as possible away from the idea of paying any money, even though you could argue that the city
people have all said this is a police issue. Yeah. Why has this become such a political issue?
They should take out a mortgage on City Hall and pay for the search. And then there's the province. So I believe a real leader in that situation, remember, this is July, so we're still 60 days away from the campaign. In July, late July, when she comes out, and it's clearly they have created an opportunity for her to say this, no search of the landfill. I'm not allowing any money to be committed to the... She could have said, you know what? We're going to meet with city officials, with the federal government. We're going to meet, and we're going to try and figure out a way of doing this and kick it down the road.
100%
down the road.
You know, I'm no expert on comms, on how to handle issues. I'm certainly not a politician, but I can tell you that I looked at that situation and said,
"Why are you doing this now?"
It is so easy to make something look as an election campaign is coming up. It's sure to be divisive. That make it look like you're doing work.
Yeah.
You might not even be doing work, but that you would be looking like you're trying. But she came so vociferously out to say, I am, and the famous phrase that she now uses, standing firm, that this, I will not put any money or people's lives at risk because of, and this is the phrase that I hate the most, which is, there's no guarantees. Well, like, there's newsflash, there's no guarantees of anything.
Yeah.
And the idea of trying and giving peace to these families, treating them like human beings, is the whole problem in the first place. You know, the idea that Indigenous women have been mistreated, neglected, marginalized by everyone, every institution, and that's how they end up in a landfill. And the fact that yet insult to injury, and this gets us to, I think, the recent campaign, which has really, I think, rocked Winnipeg, and I think it certainly rocked the Indigenous community. I was at a gathering this morning where that's all anyone could talk about, which is what the Premier is doing in creating ads, big one-page ads in our newspaper, and putting them out saying she's standing firm and celebrating the fact that she will not search for Indigenous women at a landfill site.
Would you say that, I mean, it's always like whether it's Indigenous or non-Indigenous, leadership and the broader community, but would you say a lot of Indigenous people, even particularly those who may have spoken directly to the Premier about this, were they shocked at the change of course? Like, or is this sort of, or was she just living up to their expectations? Did she actually create expectations though with something more supportive and progressive?
Oh, I think people had hoped that this was a person who would show at least interest in the ways that Brian Pallister didn't show interest in the issues of reconciliation. And, for all intents and purposes, it was a promising start. I mean, even people who had created favorability, I mean, some of the most popular people in the Conservative Party with Indigenous communities are, people like Eileen Clark and people who then started to come back into the fold and be involved, who had rejected Brian Pallister. And I think the fact that Heather Stefanson came out and said we even needed a feasibility study was in direct reaction to the Winnipeg police, who were debating the issue of, we don't think it's feasible. I mean, Chief Danny Smythe, I wrote a piece about this to say, why frame this as feasible? We're talking about human beings here. And, you could compare it with the submarine search of millionaires at the bottom of the ocean. Or
Picton.
Like, it's not an issue of feasibility. We can't put human lives as feasible or not. We're talking about an issue around giving people, our citizens, brothers and sisters, peace. And so anyways, the challenge, I think, is this hard turn that the Conservative Party have taken really smacks of desperation. And what it looks like is that our polling, of course, that we've done suggests that half of Manitobans don't favor the land search, the landfill search. And, but there is a hard 30. There's a hard, strongly opposed of 30% in that movement. And that's the shoring up. That's the shoring up move, which is that these ads making such a strong stand on the landfill, celebrating it in kind of what I call the gruesome way, just is about shoring up 30% and not appealing to anybody else.
So I'm going to read another direct quote from Heather. So again, this is exactly what the Premier said. We're very concerned about what was in the report, the feasibility report, and the risks that were identified, asbestos and other toxic chemicals and so on. We made what was a very difficult decision. We may disagree on the decision that's been made, but I think we can all agree on one thing, that this is a horrific tragedy that's happened not just to the families, but to the community and to other high-risk individuals who are living in our community. I want to make sure that we've got proper programming in place to help those individuals through these difficult times, to ensure this doesn't happen to more families in the community. Now, the part of that continues to leap off the page for me is a very difficult decision. So let's accept this decision at face value.
Sure.
Okay.
Let's actually believe for a moment that we've got health and safety issues, even though experts have said, have questioned that.
Yeah. So very difficult decision. I do think, and for those of you listening to the podcast, we've referred to advertisements. So the Free Press sells now wrapper ads. So this is a wrapper. It's a front page and a back page and 2 inside pages that wrap around the actual front page of the newspaper. And if you're wondering whether those of us in the journalistic side like the wrapper advertisements, we do not. Do we understand that it's a reflection of the new economics surrounding newspapers? Absolutely. Enough said about that. But on it, so you have tiles with individual promises. There were 4 tiles. The number 1 tile at the top of the wrapper on the front page is standing firm and saying no to the landfill. And the problem that I have with her acknowledging that it's a difficult decision is that I'd like somebody to come up with another parallel of a difficult decision that somebody had to make where lives were at stake, where it was very emotional, where making the difficult decision became a springboard to a tagline in a campaign. I honestly believe, and in a lot of the worst ways, the Conservative campaign is forging new ground. They are.
I called it in gruesome directions.
Yeah. It's a very weird thing. Okay, well, but let's take these 2 issues together. And you've referred to that you think they're going after the hard 30. Okay, so I'm actually let's talk about the landfill first, and I'm going to slightly disagree with you in that again, the plural of anecdote is not data, but I will rely heavily on anecdote for this. I've been at birthday parties, I've been at other social gatherings, just exchanges I've had with people on social media and via email. I think the progressive conservatives have done a masterful job of misrepresenting this issue to the point where when I talk to people who are not directly involved and maybe not all that well informed about the full, story, the first thing they bring up is, oh man, $184 million.
Oh, 100%.
That is so much money, and nobody even knows whether the remains are there. And I usually respond with, well, there's actually a range. It could cost anywhere from 84 to 184, but there's also a possibility that, who knows, it would cost less than that if, and as for not knowing, the police have already said there are remains in the landfill. So, but these details get lost. So that's where, when we go to our Free Press poll, Probe Research, CTV News, and we found a slight majority, it was 52%, said search the landfill, and 48 said no. 2 things come to mind. Number 1 is, I'm actually pretty impressed that 52% of people could fight through the misinformation of the Tory campaign. But the other part of it is, I actually think that this is trying to appeal to a lot of people who are queasy about reconciliation and confused about it.
This is what I was going to add to what this isn't just about a landfill.
Yeah.
This is also about painting Wabcanoe in all the ways that the Tories have tried for how many years now? 8 years. To paint him as a criminal, paint him as a ruffian, the exact campaign that we started out with at the very beginning, which is the Wob way is the wrong way, the Wob way is the criminal way, the Wob way is XYZ. There's the ad that went out today, which is the ad calling him a joker, and then listing off. And the goal of that ad, of course, is for all of us in the media to remind the public that he has a criminal past, because he has time and time again said, I take acknowledgement for this past. And while he may not have said sorry, I don't think he owes sorry to the individual person, but maybe to the people that maybe he harmed in the past, when we don't know about that and we don't know about the history around that. But absolutely, everybody deserves a second chance. Certainly if he was a non-Indigenous person, he would get a second chance. Mm-hmm. Most of those, non-Indigenous or Canadian MPs and MLAs who have criminal past always get a second chance. But apparently if you're Indigenous, you never get a second chance. And that's kind of what this has been painted as, is that they want to paint and draw the biggest fears for certain Manitobans around the issue of a First Nations premier that isn't really so much about WAB anymore, but it's about when I was a kid looking at the front page of the Free Press and seeing Manitoba's Most Wanted and seeing Indigenous faces as most of those wanted, which of course isn't because Indigenous peoples are savages and criminals. It's because colonialism, because violence, because the Indian Act, because residential schools, they have been put there. It's a logical outcome that Indigenous peoples tend to be more in prison, tend to be more in the child welfare system, tend to be more murdered and missing. And but yet people don't understand that. They don't understand the historical side of it. So instead, they're left with stereotypes. And they really want to draw upon those stereotypes in voters in the waning days of this campaign to try in some way to shore up that 30% and to really just to save the House. And I would argue, and I said this today to some people, mostly because for the first time ever, I get emails that say, I've always voted Conservative. I'm actually going to vote NDP this time. And it's mostly based on the misrepresentation of the landfill, or that I'm uncomfortable with the way in which Stefanson is creating this creation around Indigenous peoples, are drawing on stereotypes. And I think they see that. They know that in many ways this campaign has been a disaster. And as a result, they're trying to save the House.
Yeah. Well, again, I think that there is a growing, I've called it anti-reconciliationist, but I think it is a discomfort with reconciliation. At the recent Conservative Party of Canada convention in Quebec City, one of the strong themes that ran through speeches there was this idea of like, we have to stop apologizing for stuff. We've apologized enough, asked and answered. And I think that is I've heard that for years from individual readers in the Free Press. But, certainly to see that expressed as a major theme in a convention, a meeting of the party that could, form the next government in Canada, is worrisome to me because, really, when it comes right down to it, like when you try to deconstruct an entire culture, who's to say how long the reconstruction takes? And I'm going to go out on a limb too and say, you know what? Those of us, like the ancestors of the people who tried to deconstruct, we don't get to say when enough is enough, right? We should really let the people who were deconstructed
and
come to us and let us
absolutely,
know.
we should put as much energy to build a culture as we have in destroying it. And the fact is that we have not yet done in any way the same kind of vigor and energy into helping Indigenous peoples than we have destroying them.
So, as the somewhat neutral party in the podcast, to try and summarize a lot of the discussion that you've had thus far, it seemed like in the premiership of Heather Stefanson, it was a return to the progressive side of progressive conservative versus the previous premier, who certainly heavily lent more toward the conservative side of progressive conservative, which means that now, with particular emphasis on the issue of the landfill, but also some of the other issues that you've both highlighted, it makes it even more strange to witness this change in position from the premier. And I don't want to speak for you both, but I feel like that's what leads us all to question the motivation behind taking these stances.
The sincerity of it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But more than that, honestly, it just saddens me that we don't have the opportunity to sit down with Heather to discuss these things, because I really do think, again,
you're going to make me cry again.
Oh, I know, but as the neutral guy in the podcast, I just want to remind people, you might think Dan and Niigaan have opinions. They certainly do, but this podcast has never been an opportunity to have a gotcha moment with anyone from any political stripe. It's always been an opportunity to facilitate meaningful and interesting conversation.
Listen to our election panel, for example. We went at length, letting people from all different walks of life take a great deal of space out. But this is an issue that has just drowned out some of the other elements of the Tory campaign. Tax cuts, I think that they tried to make this a central issue. And then, of course, crime, injustice, and homelessness, or the fact that Conservatives poured all this money into policing to try to deal with the issue of crime. We already talked about the fact that in many ways drove the tone of the debate early on in the campaign because Wab Kinew from the NDP came out with a big crime announcement, almost in direct reaction to the announcement of the hiring of all these police officers. So in many ways, the Conservatives early on, by sticking with some quite core issues, and as we polled, the issues that Manitobans care a lot about, the top three issues were healthcare, the issue of affordability, and the issue of crime. Those are the ones that people cared about the most. It wasn't the landfill. Now it's suddenly all about the landfill.
The landfill, and also like circling back a bit to parental rights. So, we talked about, so what's the macro strategy or the real strategy behind the landfill? And, and I do agree with you. It's you want to galvanize, you want to motivate that core. I actually think that the way they've gone at it is to try and also capture some soft conservative support, but people who might genuinely feel, non-Indigenous people who might feel fatigue from the
I think that's a real possibility. I don't know if there's enough there. I mean, I guess, we have been talking time and time again about the tightness of ridings. I wonder if there is, and I wrote about this, I said, I wonder if there's enough of a discomfort with just the notion of a First Nations premier to push that enough. But I think the loss of the Liberal vote and what it's looking like to be a real bottoming out of that may be more than the loss of the Liberal vote, may be more than the anti-Indigenous or anti-reconciliation vote.
Well, but even more than that, like I'm talking to a lot of Conservatives right now who are extremely uncomfortable about parental rights and landfill, and somewhat confused by it. And these are people who will vote Conservative. Like a lot of these people that I know are people who are deeply involved in the party, have been for years. What they do, when they're not involved, like they're not running the campaign. So, but what they do, because they're loyal soldiers, is they hold their nose and they vote, for their party. But, there aren't enough of those people. So, but there are another constituency of people, one more degree of separation, which is all of the peers of the people that I'm talking to. So they are, people who have also supported the PC party for a very long time, but their response will not be to vote for the NDP, but their response will be not to show up and vote.
And that's, I think, the big question. I would also say the same thing in, we're talking a lot about the kind of passion involving the search of the landfill, and we're talking about the passion of Manitobans. And I was with a group of people this morning. I mentioned it already. 600 Indigenous peoples at the convention center in downtown Winnipeg, all just furious and all just. I still think at our most passionate and furious, we often turn to, well, I'm just not going to vote, and I'm not going to participate in this colonial system, rather than to vote. And I would like to think that Indigenous peoples are more interested in voting, but the trends are suggesting that it's pretty much plateaued, and that Indigenous peoples tend to, about 30% of us vote. And while there is, I've said numbers like 20,000 first-time voters in this election, reaching the age of 18 for the first time, the potential of the Indigenous youth vote is remarkable. Historical mistrust may be strong enough to keep people. But I think absolutely that the Conservatives, if there's any button to push, it is the landfill, and that may drive enough young Indigenous voters to vote, and in those key ridings be the difference.
Well, it'll certainly be interesting. On the other side, like the two major negative planks of the campaign, both have a risk-reward equation attached to them. So parental rights, the strategy of the PCs, I think well reported by our newspaper now, has been, it's a play for social conservatives in the immigrant communities of South Winnipeg. Now, remarkably, the most diverse federal riding in Winnipeg. So this would be the riding that has the greatest proportion of different racialized groups other than white, is Winnipeg South, is the most diverse riding in the city. And it's purely macroeconomics and demographics and immigration policy that's sort of driven this. So huge Indo-Canadian population, huge East African and African populations, Filipinos, and not, these people are not necessarily the traditional inner city North End immigrant communities.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I mean, those communities, inner city North End, Maples, those are definitely diverse communities.
Yeah.
In fact, where the diversity would be the majority, but may not be as many cultures. And
so I think the strategy, is the Tories were hoping this was going to be a circuit breaker, so that the Maples, for example, hotly contested between the NDP and the Tories, has been for decades now. So could I can hear the conversation almost in the Tory war room. Could an emphasis on parental rights upend the momentum the NDP might normally have in that part of the city? Could enough people who might vote NDP actually change their votes to support the Tories based on this one issue? It's the same thing. And so it's a play for social conservatives in those communities. Now, what I would say is interesting is when I watch the television coverage of the big rally at the legislature. So there a rally and counter rally. So rally in favor of parental rights, counter rally in support of LGBTQ rights. On the parental rights side, 3 out of every 5 faces were racialized groups, brown faces, and it was significant. Like it was really obvious to me, and I can see in the Tory war room that they're pointing and they're going, there we go. So the people I've talked to in the NDP campaign about it, there's the traditional analysis, which is when you go...
Which is exactly why you put Abi Khan as the face of the parental rights campaign.
No, that's right. People are trying to understand why Abi Khan. It's not because he's at risk in Fort White. I don't really think Abi Khan's at risk in Fort White. And for those of you scoring at home, the Liberals have pulled everything out. They pulled all their resources out of Fort White, out of all the city ridings. They're trying to shore up St. Boniface because the voter ID...
Wab Kinew was there yesterday making a French announcement. So the NDP 100% sees St. Boniface as capable.
But Abi Khan, no. Abi Khan is, let's face it, in a pretty white, caucus. He is one of the notable non-white faces, and they're making use of that. There are, his face is on bus shelters and benches and recycling bins all over the city. So when I talk to the NDP, what they will say is, well, when you go this dark and negative, especially this late in the campaign, it's usually a sign of desperation. Except that they'll also say, but we're not entirely sure how this is going to land. I can see half a dozen ridings in the south part of Winnipeg, where like 500 votes that switch from the NDP to the Tories, which is a swing of 1,000 votes. Could it save seats for the Tories? I think it's quite possible. I hope it doesn't. Not because I care who wins, but because I don't want anybody to win on that issue.
And the wild card, and we've been saying it in the podcast week after week, is the wild card is just will the Liberal vote hold? And if the Liberal vote won't hold,
this just in. Yeah, Liberal vote has imploded. Yeah, sorry. I just got it. Somebody just handed it to me right now.
With all respect to Dougal Lamont, who is a great guest on our podcast, they've run a campaign that I think has been energetic at times, a real good college try. But the fact is that the NDP saw the blood in the water with the Liberals, have Wab Kinew asked continual questions to Dougal Lamont and went after Dougal Lamont's vote and has been going after it for a while now. And now the reality is that with that Liberal, if that Liberal slips, which it looks like it's going to, then the reality is that the NDP is going to benefit from that. So while we're talking a little bit about conservative votes going over to the NDP, I think it might be as much, maybe more so, the Liberal vote, which will merely make the difference in those key ridings.
So I can't tell you who told me the story. Because I can't reveal.
I'm going to guess it's Adam. Is it Adam?
No,
Did Adam tell you the story?
I can neither confirm
it wasn't.
nor deny.
It wasn't Adam either, and you don't get any more guesses.
Okay.
No, but someone related a story about being at an event where Gary Dewar was there and Hugh McFadden who was the former leader of the PC party, was there. And they were chatting. Gary and Hugh were very cordial. But there was a third person there watching, the kind of playful jabs and whatever. And Hugh walked off, and this person said to Gary Dewar, wow, you guys, it looked like there was like some real edginess, between you. Are you concerned, about what Hugh might do in the next election? And he goes, I don't care who the PC leader is. I care who the Liberal leader is. And it's really always been thus. Even though outside the city of Winnipeg, Tories and NDP parties compete for the same votes out there. If the PCs win Dauphin, or the NDP wins Dauphin and Gimli and Selkirk, they'll have done it by capturing a lot of support from people who voted Tory for a couple of elections. In the city of Winnipeg, the Liberals are a huge X factor in determining whether the PCs or the NDP have the upper hand. And in this particular election, and I don't think for lack of trying, Dougall just hasn't found traction. The Liberals haven't found traction. I would also say, too, organizationally, not running candidates in every riding is unforgivable.
The paper candidate issue, I think, is the unforgivable issue. Not running candidates in 7-8 ridings, I believe, right?
And just for those of you, again, scoring at home, literally, they could walk into the studio. Dougall could walk into the studio and say to Adam, would you be our candidate in Thompson? And he'd be allowed to put his name on the ballot. Adam, don't run in Thompson. When you run in the city.
Well, I would have to provide my consent. But
I would tell all my cousins in Thompson to vote for you.
That's right.
But you get a vote total of 4.
It really is they don't even need someone who lives in Thompson to run in Thompson. That's why, not filling those, it's just unforgivable.
And not having that electorate to compete with for the NDP is going to be a huge boon. And it's in a very tight race that is looking less tight than perhaps we've predicted in the past. In the past few weeks, but still will be tight in a number of ridings. And so what we're looking at, and people have been asking for me to, we've been sort of talking about predictions. At this point, it is, if the NDP vote comes out, if the Liberal vote fades, I don't think the Conservatives have shown anything to appeal to other than that strong 30 I talked about, which is almost a guarantee of, let's say, between 16 to 20 seats. And so we're looking at something very real, and history's being made. Regardless of who wins on Tuesday, I've been telling everybody that history will be made on Tuesday. We'll either have the first elected female premier in history. That's remarkable unto itself. Mm-hmm. Way to go, Manitoba. We'll also perhaps have the first First Nations premier in history. Remarkable. Way to go, Manitoba.
Yeah, it's I would also say in a broader sense, this is the first province to put parental rights fully on the ballot. It has played a role in at least one other election, but not to this extent. So again, that will have an impact on other conservative parties in other provinces, and whether or not they, decide to, dance with the,
you mean that,
the dark side.
Suing the federal government again over the carbon tax? That's not the center. Are you falling asleep there?
No, that was me. That was the beginning of a migraine.
His eyes rolled so far back into his head.
Yeah, I know. There was and it should be said, there's a lot of silly bugger in both the NDP and the Tory campaigns. We're going to take the federal government to court to sue them for the way Heather Stefanson put it was for putting carbon tax on your Manitoba hydro bill. Well, first of all, it's only on the natural gas portion of the bill, and the government is involved in programs trying to get you to convert from that to electricity, and that's really a good thing to do. So we pay less carbon tax by burning less natural gas, But I just, so that to me was silly bugger. Just the way that I still think that that Wobb's promise to freeze hydro rates was silly. So
Silly, the most silliest of ways.
Yeah.
But we've spent now 40 minutes or so in the podcast.
He keeps resetting the clock, so we don't know how long we've been at this.
We're sort of at that 45-minute point, and as we kind of bring things into order close, one issue that I thought that you would probably talk more about, that I will both nudge you on just slightly before we wrap up, it's healthcare. Because certainly for a lot of people, that seems to be one of the biggest motivating factors. And in the absence of Heather being able to give an account of herself, the PCs have certainly not said a lot on healthcare, other than to say that, of course, the pandemic meant that they were not able to do what they wanted to do, which I think is fair. But an issue that I think you mentioned last week, Dan, was the fact that it's somewhat strange that a lot of the announcements that have come out from the Progressive Conservative Party have not been led by the Premier.
No, it's. I wrote in my newsletter this week, I actually tracked the announcements that the parties made and how many times they did announcements in one of their own held ridings and how many times they go to a riding held by another party. So if you're only in your own ridings, you're playing defense. Right, you're in a defensive posture. If you do most of your announcements in ridings other than NDP, ridings that you hold, then you're on offense. The Tories only did 2 announcements during the campaign that were not in Tory-held ridings. There were 2 other ridings. One was an event they did at 300 Main because they just wanted to be in a big shiny building. So that really isn't riding specific. And then Kelvin Gertson did a scrum outside 23 Kennedy, which again is not riding specific. But outside of that, only twice did they go anywhere near an NDP riding. The New Democrats, on the other hand, did 10 full announcements during the campaign in ridings held by Tories. Some of them double dipping, and only did like a couple in their own ridings. And so, it's healthcare. But the reason why the Tories had so little to say about healthcare is because, they went hard on all kinds of government announcements until August 1st. And then they got caught by surprise because the NDP came out in full campaign mode at the beginning of August and hammered healthcare announcements.
And when the Progressive Conservatives did then get out there themselves, you had folks like Scott Johnston, Kelvin Gertson, Kevin Klein, and even former podcast guest Rochelle Squires, being the folks making the announcements.
Yep.
Again, as the somewhat neutral guy, it just seems
and
weird.
Not Health Minister Audrey Gordon.
Yeah, I actually, I'm going to say right now, there's an Amber Alert out for Audrey Gordon. I'm concerned.
I mean,
I'm concerned that something has happened. And Audrey, if you're listening right now,
I mean, last seen in August making an announcement about HSC, but generally, I mean, after having been the face in many ways of some of the more brutal examples within the healthcare system of people dying, people being transported and dying, and being Audrey Gordon forcing her to face the heat on that. Then when it came to making the Rosie announcements, there was nowhere to be seen.
No, and I think the problem is that really Brian Pallister broke it, and Heather Stefanson ended up having to buy it. When it comes to healthcare, and do I think that what they were what Heather was trying to do in the last 2 years, a lot of it was positive? But I think they largely ignore, they refuse to deal with the central issue, which is people the healthcare professionals, and we saw it this week, right, where the NDP hosted an event with 8 opinion-leading physicians in the city, some really heavy hitters.
And came out today with a letter from HSC doctors. I mean, they really have on their side. Oh, yeah, that's the same one. I mean, they just coming out time and time again, the nurses union, people in healthcare,
allied healthcare workers,
they're really winning that ground game battle. And, you couldn't probably also pick a worse time for people to go on strike in the civil servants in Manitoba.
I think for healthcare, and when we did our election panel, and former health minister Erin Selby was part of our panel, we did get in her grill a little bit because when she talked about the NDP is more credible on healthcare because they know we can do it. We can hire more nurses. We'll get more doctors. We can do it. I'm not so sure they can. And I have written a column about the fact that certain parts of the healthcare system are so broken. I'm not sure anybody can fix them, not in conventional ways. But the one thing that the New Democrats have going for them, other than the fact that they're not PCs, is the fact, though, that they do know how to talk to these groups. The one thing that the Progressive Conservatives did not do is they never talked to physicians about reorganizing the hospitals. They never talked to nurses. They never asked them to help plan the process. They just came up with the plan, they delivered the plan, and then they expected people to fall in line. And that was the literal manifestation of Brian Pallister's leadership style. Let it be written, so let it be done. I can hear Yul Brynner's voice in the back of my head from the Ten Commandments, right? But sorry, for younger pod listeners, you want to Wikipedia Yul Brynner and Ten Commandments on that one.
Even I don't know that one.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Well, it's a famous quote. Just get over it. But it like that my way or the highway approach. You know what? It didn't work. And in particular, the revenge of the nurses. Because,
we've been running a campaign for a long time.
You guys are going to leave, you're going to leave the Grace Hospital, you're going to leave Concordia, you're going to leave Seven Oaks, and we're sending you downtown to work at Health Sciences Center in St. Boniface. And the nurses went, I don't think so. And they went, and a lot of them, they retired, they left the province, and a ton of them went and worked in the private sector. You know what? To not anticipate that reaction, it goes beyond bad planning to incompetence. And you know what? Once you convince people that you will not listen to them, even when they were introducing things to fix things, they were doing it without consulting with anybody. The task force was just saying, yep, we're going to do this at the Grace Hospital. Well, we don't really care what people at the Grace Hospital think. We're just going to do it. I don't know. I don't know how they could have expected a different reaction now to see all these groups coming out and now campaigning against them. It's extraordinary.
The one thing I'd also just add about healthcare, that the wait times, the power of social media when it comes to wait times, and I wrote a piece about this, and the real life granular impact on families of waiting up to 24 hours for basic procedures, or in some cases emergency procedures. When it came to my father, being literally in heart failure and having nobody to see him, and there's no bed, there's no pillows available. That is absolutely atrocious. And how I think people react to those kind of little experiences that their neighbor has had, that isn't little to the neighbor, but of course becomes this story and becomes a sort of legend. And I think that the legend of the failing of healthcare is very much being put at the foot of the Conservative Party. The Conservatives can all day say that it was the NDP's fault and they inherited a broken system to begin with. We can talk about Brian Pallister, but the fact is that it is very much seen as a Conservative failure. Yeah. And that is the story that's in the streets.
I think it will be interesting because, again, friends, family, acquaintances, whatever, everybody wants to share their healthcare horror stories. I had a conversation recently with somebody who said, my kid broke his arm playing baseball, and we had to wait 5 hours in an emergency room on a Saturday night.
That's pretty good, actually.
No. Well, I was going to, and I said to them, when you have a non-life-threatening condition, and hey, sorry about your son, right? I hope he heals well, but you really think that 5 hours is too much? But this is now an expression of expectation, right? Is that, the people who waited 30 hours to get somebody to help them with their gallstones, or the people who take their elderly mother or father into the ER and really get put through the ringer and where you're already like you're worried, like is this the end? Am I witnessing the beginning of the end? That's so stressful and so much. Like you were in the ER for a long time with your dad. Well, you know what? Like suddenly everybody is commiserating. Like everybody is talking off the same points, even though really a lot of us still get like pretty darn good healthcare. Like when we have an emergency, when something threatens our life, we do not want for anything in this country. What we're talking about is the backlog and the mismanagement of elective procedures and it's unconscionable.
And some overrun ERs that are now incapable of handling what was supposed to be a smooth transition to streamline services that never really materialized. And this is where the argument that the Conservatives make that the pandemic messed up their plan, that just hasn't caught. It just hasn't caught. Whether it's true or not, I don't think people care about it anymore. They just know it's broken.
Yeah, I think it's a shame, like for the Conservatives, that the pandemic didn't give them a better excuse for what they did to healthcare prior to the pandemic. And there's no doubt that it really did like complicate it. But what they did was they weakened the system. They it's the largest driver of government expenditures. It's like a huge, billions and billions of dollars worth of expense every year. And Brian Pallister made a wager, right? He bet that he could starve the system, flatline funding in essence, and that would leave, enough money to cut taxes, and balance the budget, and which were his main priorities, without breaking healthcare. And then, like once the taxes were cut, and once the budget was balanced, then I think he thought he was going to slowly build things back up. But the fact was he cut or froze too much. He froze transfers to municipalities
so aggressively that you just ignored the pivotal issue of the downtown, which led to all of this addictions and homelessness crisis. It took an already bad situation and made it exponentially worse by removing social organizations in downtown and so on. I mean, we've talked about this numerous times during the podcast, and one thing that I am very sad about is we absolutely would have given space to the Conservative Party to say everything that they would want. They even could have sent us a representative. I think we would have been open to that at the 11th hour to at least certainly talk and present the party platform. But unfortunately, we did the best I think we could today, and that we could to talk about the issues. Maybe we didn't get to tax cuts, which maybe the Conservatives would have liked us to talk a little bit more about. I think people can look up that, and we encourage people to look up their policy platform on that. We can look up the hiring of more police officers to deal with the issue of crime. They can look up the various amount of promises of getting more nurses, more doctors, whatever the policies that you want to look up in the Conservative Party. They're all there to see, and I encourage people to do that.
Yep.
As the sort of quasi-representative of the listener in this kind of setting.
Oh, is that who you are now? Is the
Sure,
you're not auditioning to be the third? We were going to call you Silver.
I might have to reconsider my position.
Yeah.
But no, in all seriousness, thank you both for having a very pragmatic conversation about the issues that are at hand here. I think it's fair that we're all genuinely saddened that the Premier didn't have an opportunity to have her own crack at the whip here. And you never know. Post-election, maybe we will have that opportunity, whether she be a representative in the legislature, whether she be the Premier, we don't know, but it would be wonderful to have her.
So when you told me to get over her, you're raising my hopes again that she might come and talk to me?
I'm just being as gentle as possible with you, Dan. One thing I did want to say, though, is to sort of pick up on Niigaan's point, please, folks, be as informed as you can about these issues. Get out there and read the platforms of the parties that are running, look at the candidates that are running in your riding, and for heaven's sake, please get out there and vote.
Yeah. I don't really think... I know a lot of people will respond to the negativity that's entered the campaign, maybe lamenting the lack of support that their party has. Look, like we're all going to put on our big boy and big girl pants right now. If the Progressive Conservatives lose the election, it won't be because they didn't in large part deserve it. They have done a lot to erode support for their government. And in fact, I think that they, under normal circumstances, if they had been clever about it, they had at least one more majority mandate in their future. So, I don't like, are they going to lose? I am still not willing to say that I know the outcome. But if they lose, it won't be because the Tories didn't do something to deserve it. And that's where we have to be less emotional and more pragmatic. There's no conspiracy. There isn't a major party running in this election that would ruin the province. There isn't. That's often the tenor of discussion, right? Oh, we have to save the province from the other.
Or that
guys.
one party is not experienced enough. I mean, I think that's preposterous. I mean, every government that comes in is virtually inexperienced. When Brian Pallister started, virtually inexperienced.
Yeah.
Almost the entire caucus had no idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
So the idea that offering any party is inexperienced they're all inexperienced.
Yeah, actually, the funny thing is that Brian Pallister sort of got kicked out of Gary Filmon's cabinet, which maybe should have been a foreshadowing for what happened when his own party kicked him out. Sorry, Brian. There's somebody else who won't be on the podcast.
Oh, we'll check the markings where people are listening from and see if he's listening.
That's right. We'll look for that big glowing dot in Portage La Prairie. Oh, God.
Now, I've heard a silly line a few times in the past that it doesn't matter who you vote for, it's always the government that gets in. And I think with that kind of attitude, do people ever spoil ballots here? Well, folks, if you don't like any of the platforms, go out there and spoil your ballot, because then at least your vote is still being counted.
The previous opinion does not represent the producers of the Niigaan and the Lone Ranger podcast. Okay.
Well, we're trying to encourage people. I mean, I hope that everybody goes out. I hope everybody participates. One thing that has been just inspiring for me to watch this election has been my daughter, who has just every night went out and canvassed. I mean, arguably she's been, and I've been I've been open to saying that it's been for the NDP. So, but she's become this provincial politics guru in our house that really holds me to account and constantly is reminding me of the different things that are happening in the campaign. And so I think I've been more engaged, not just from the podcast, not just from being friends with you, but just that I have this young voter who's 17, about to vote for the very first time, caring so deeply about the province that, in tears with her friends, cares about these issues. Yeah. And I think that's a good thing for all Manitobans.
And I can confirm both of my kids voted in advance polls, which means that I can extend their residency in my house. They know that
was that up for
it's a rule that if you don't vote in any election where you're eligible to vote, that it's sayonara, hit the road.
Geez,
don't let the door hit you in the back on the way.
We just had this thing about parental rights, and now what the?
Ooh, where did this come from?
You know what? I had to stand firm. I had to draw the line somewhere. And
That's right. Yeah. What a hard decision that was. Yeah. But we thank everybody for listening to our. I mean, was this the first podcast that we had no guest?
Yeah,
I think
this is the first podcast that, I think that's a marker. That's a tipping point in which we did the best we could to fill up this time with each other. I think we didn't have any problem with that, but here we are in the CJNU studios. Adam, thanks again for filling in. Although Pleasure. Now I feel like you're becoming the third voice on our pod here.
No, we've agreed still not to be named after he who shall not be named on the podcast.
No, I want to name him Silver.
I'll be Silver. Silver's fine.
Silver, the horse, and I think that in the Niigaan Lone Ranger podcast, we need a Silver. And so big thanks to everybody at the Free Press as well, Wendy Swatsky, Paul Samin, everybody who does a great job. And, all of our colleagues doing a great job showing once again that independent journalism is the key for provinces. It's the key for communities. If you want local, important, critical journalism, I can promise you that some office in some major metropolitan city hundreds of miles from us would have done a terrible job covering this election. And
what do they know?
What do they know? And in fact, I'm contractually obligated to one of them. So,
sorry. Yeah, we could edit that out at the end.
I would just say that we need local journalism to cover an election like this. And I hope this election has proven that how critically important we provide a service to Manitobans and Canadians.
I would agree, and heartfelt thanks to everybody as well. It's been intense, to do 6 weeks straight.
But you love it. That's the thing. You are in your element.
I do not know what you're talking about, sir.
Oh, come on. There's been a lot of joy.
He's so much joy.
Yeah, this last one with Heather, giving us the ghosting us, it's been hard on me. We made fun of it, but it is but I mean seriously, I don't feel like we're better as a podcast because we don't have her. We wanted her here to speak on her own behalf. And, I just, and the one thing is when I did meet her in Vic's Market.
I know you did. This story we've heard many times.
Okay.
There was a promise. But the bottom line of it is that I think we did the best we could. And just a huge thanks to everybody who's going out there. Go out and vote, everybody. Go out and practice your right and evoke your right. And make sure to when you do that, turn to the person beside you, even if you didn't vote like you or think like you or act like you, and just realize that we're all in this together.
Good on you. That's what you should look until they tell you to stop talking to the person in the next voting booth. Just good on you.
I meant outside.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. Fair enough. Thanks very much, everybody. And we will see you for a post-election analysis of some sort. Details to be provided at a later date, but I'm pretty sure I know who won't be on the podcast. But okay, I'm letting it go.
Let it go.
Okay, thanks very much,
everybody.